Chapter 14 of Angel Food for Jack and Jill, Little Talks to Little Folks by Rev. Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 14. Chippy. Eddie Cooper wanted a pet for his son, Teddy, who was 7 months old. So Eddie decided to buy a dog. He looked at all kinds of dogs, and finally one day he bought a small puppy. Eddie named the dog Chippy. Now I don't have to tell you that little Teddy Cooper and Chippy became very good friends. The dog and the boy were always together. During the day they played together, and at night the dog slept under the little boy's bed. When Teddy was old enough to walk, Chippy was always by his side. They were two good friends who grew up together, two friends who loved each other. Chippy always took pretty good care of his little friend. When Chippy thought Teddy was hungry, he brought him an apple. When the boy lost one of his toys, Chippy always found it for him. When it was time to get ready for bed, Chippy found the boy's slippers and held them in his mouth. These things happened day after day. They were the dog's way of showing his friend that he loved him. Of course, Teddy was very good to the dog, too. He was always kind. When he played with the dog he was never rough, and he never did anything to hurt his pet in any way. Teddy petted the dog often, and he did his very best to make the dog happy. For 6 long years Teddy Cooper and Chippy were friends. Then something terrible happened. Teddy Cooper became very sick. For 7 weeks Teddy suffered night and day. The doctors and nurses tried hard to help the little boy, but God wanted Teddy in heaven, and God had His way. So the dog was left behind. Chippy was a sad dog without Teddy. For 3 days the dog stayed under the boy's bed and wouldn't eat. Chippy had lost his best friend, and he found it hard to live without him. Then the dog began to act very strangely. Each morning the dog disappeared, but he always came back at night. No one knew where the dog went. No one knew where the dog spent his time. One day Mrs. Cooper discovered that some of Teddy's toys and pieces of clothing were missing. She looked all over the house but couldn't find them. Finally she spoke to one of the neighbors, and what do you think? The neighbor told Mrs. Cooper that she had seen Chippy going down the street with a slipper in his mouth. So the next morning Mrs. Cooper watched the dog, and sure enough, she saw Chippy leave the house with a cap in his mouth. There was only one thing for Mrs. Cooper to do. She followed the dog. And where do you think the dog led her? Chippy led her to Teddy's grave. And was Mrs. Cooper surprised? There on the grave the woman found several toys, a rubber, a slipper, and 2 socks. The dog had carried all these things to the boy's grave. Chippy thought his friend needed his toys and clothing. Even though Teddy was dead, Chippy didn't forget his friend. The dog was faithful to his friend and tried to help him. But the grave stopped the kind little animal. When our friends die, children, the grave doesn't stop us. Oh, no! When our friends die, we can still help them. We can help them by our prayers. What about your friends who have died? Have you forgotten them? Do you ever pray for your friends who have passed away? Your friends may be suffering in purgatory and they may need your prayers. The souls in purgatory cannot pray for themselves, but you can pray for them. You can help them in their sufferings. You can shorten their time in purgatory. The dog in our story thought that he was helping his little friend, but really he wasn't helping him. That isn't the way it is with us. We really can help our dead. If you know someone who is suffering, wouldn't you help him? Certainly you would. Well, the souls in purgatory are suffering, and they are crying out to you for help. They want your prayers, lots of prayers, because your prayers will send them to God. Boys and girls, there are many souls in purgatory who have no one to pray for them. They suffer and suffer and suffer. Perhaps a few prayers from you will get one of those souls into heaven. Why don't you try to get that soul into heaven today? Say some prayers for the poor souls during Mass this morning. Remember them in your prayers tonight. Remember the poor souls every day. Prayer is a wonderful thing. Prayer does wonderful things for people who live on earth, and it helps the dead, too. So get busy with your prayers. Pray for your own dead first. Then pray for the poor souls in purgatory. The poor souls need your help. They need your prayers. End of chapter 14.